right, we have a fantastic show on today. A treat for you guys. A treat. Obviously, I can never remember you're looking at it, if it's to my right or to my left. But Coach DePascale is here with me as always. Obviously, and we have a great guest today, Coach Brian Kula, who, for lack of a better term, is a speed and strength and conditioning coach to the stars, as we call it. Like really some of the best players throughout the country. A lot of people obviously are familiar with the fact that you worked with Christian McCafferty over the years. But he was based out in Colorado. He's now, we'll talk about where he's moved to now, moving to Nashville. But he really built a huge name, developing athletes, developing speed, because that's always the thing that comes to the prominence. But he's a coach as well, so he's been a coach all these years as well. I think you've gone back and forth, right? You've coached and you meant to step away for a little bit and came back, but so he's a guy that really understands both the training aspect, the coaching aspect, kind of the importance of integrating that, but really developing elite level athleticism, power, speed. Coach Kula is not just a pro, not just a guru, but a guy who really has lived it, and has helped guys get to the level that a lot of you watching this want to get to. So we can't thank you enough for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
I've watched a lot of your stuff. I love your intensity. I've watched from the videos with the I know you have the vibrating plate now that you've been using that stuff, and I love how you're constantly looking to innovate and find new ways to get athletes better. Talk about the background of everything, how you got into it, and bringing us up a little bit to today, kind of that whole background so everyone understands.
You bet. Yeah, so I don't know. I kind of had a fairly linear path to, the speed, strength, conditioning world. I grew up in a gym. My dad was a high school PE teacher and track coach, football coach. His dad was a high school principal, football coach, kind of a athletic trainer, type back in the 50s. So I come from a little bit of a legacy of coaches. I never really thought I'd do anything else. When I went off to college, I was going to play sports and become a coach, just like my grandfather and my dad come from a kind of family of teachers, and, never really saw myself or had a plan to kind of do what we're doing now. But I went into education and I taught and coached for 27 years. So I was actually in that, consistently from 96 till, 2020 when the pandemic hit.
Right.
And, I don't know, through that, there were some just different things that happened, training athletes that wanted to train because they, they were stuck at home or whatever. And that kind of helped thrust us into business. And we decided to, build a facility and do that more full time, and kind of got out of the coaching and more into the training side of things. I had Christian for a few years prior to that, training him out of the school that we were both at together for over at Valor Christian. And from there, it just kind of spiraled and grew. And I think they liked what we were doing from a speed priority aspect of how we trained. It was a little bit different than kind of maybe some of the mainstream stuff that was going on. And, we built a business out of it. So now here we are with, a few facilities and training thousands of athletes and, really getting to hopefully impact a lot more people through what we're doing versus, the old, I just had my track teams back in the day.
Right. No, it's a great point. And there's so much new stuff. I don't know. It's like, I was a track coach. I ran track and played football. I played football in college, but ran track. And my father's still a track coach. He's 84 years old.
Wow.
He's a lifer, coach. He's a lifer.
Yep. I had sprint facility. I had a speed and quickness facility from 2004 to 2011. And was it kind of in that world for a long time. And I was a track coach as well. And what I think is really interesting, and what you're really doing a phenomenal job of, is that you've elevated, and some other guys like you, I know you're Tony Holler and guys like that. You've elevated that consciousness level of how to develop speed and really taken innovative ways to make sure not just that they're developing it, but make sure it's exciting for them, and focusing the efforts in that area. Because I think what you said when you first started was really true. Like, okay, go run track. You're on the track team, and hopefully that takes care of it as a football player, right?
Right.
And in some cases, if you get a good coach, you do get that. And in some cases, sometimes it doesn't, right?
Right.
But that's always kind of been traditionally the safe and easy way, right? But when I look at what you're doing, you're taking all kinds of new things with respect to nervous system development and central nervous system development, the speed development, and it's filtering out like the tentacles that are coming from it is just, I mean, it's amazing. Like the stuff you go into, on your videos. And my sister's the athletic director at UMass Boston, and they have the top Division III hurdler.
Okay.
And their coach reached out to a guy who had to have gotten it from either you guys or Tony Hall, but their whole focus was on. She was just telling me, oh yeah, they focus heavily on her central nervous system development, and she not only she win, I think she won by a couple tenths, but she was also like 4 or 5 tenths better than she was the year before when she was in the nationals. Now she was a champion. So I said, "Oh yeah, I've heard it before. We've interviewed a few guys on this stuff." So she's like, "Really? You know about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, we do this every day. That's what we do." But it's so interesting because what you guys are doing, and what you in particular, because you're to me the leader of this, one of the biggest leaders, is really evolving the speed training process and getting people out of the mindset of like speed is just completely what you're born with and there's no way to develop it. Talk about how you kind of came to that and over your years of coaching and where you're at with that.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes all the way back to like the beginning of my coaching career. And I was not I had a decent athletic career, but I wasn't exactly a phenom. And so I had to work really hard and kind of figure things out of how to, make myself faster, do things a little different than what just the highly talented, gifted athlete had. And that led into my coaching career that was, I was 23 years old. I'm a head track coach. I'm at Greeley West High School. Talent pool was pretty shallow at some level. And so we had to kind of figure out how to manufacture speed. And we just started coming up with, ideas. And I took a lot of the stuff that I had done in college, the stuff that my dad did with me in high school. My dad was a big kind of study of the Soviet Union, system. And even back to like the Husker Power days when Boyd Epley was doing all his thing.
Oh, yeah.
You take little bits and pieces of that. And over the last, 3 decades now, I've just been a lifelong learner of, I'm not the guy that sat here and invented anything. I have picked the brains of some of the best minds in the business, Les Spellman and Dan Paff. And, there's just some of these people that I've been very fortunate enough to kind of cross paths with. And then you have to be humble enough to ask, for some help or, ask what they're doing and then take that and see how it fits into what, your environment is. And I think just over the years, we stumbled into some pretty good, some pretty cool systems and some pretty cool protocols. And then you have a little success and, obviously then you got to get some good athletes. And when, a McCaffrey calls you or Saquon or those guys, then obviously you have a much bigger platform to be able to, tell people that, hey, even at the highest level, people still need development, and with the young athletes, that you're not destined to be slow. Speed's actually a skill that can be learned just like anything else. And it does take, more than just lifting weights or more than just sprinting. There's a lot of things that go into it. And so once you've kind of figured out and picked the brains of all these, fabulous minds that are out there, then you start to kind of come up with what's your system. And I think that's the biggest thing is just being open to different ideas, is kind of what helped me get to where I'm at. I'm still, to this day, I'm still learning. I've got to meet some, really high-end trainers in the last even 6 months where I'm starting to formulate some new and different ideas. And I think that's healthy, right? Just to always be in a growth mindset.
How does, and this is, I guess, a parent question too, right? There's a lot more speed, quote unquote, coaches out there and strength conditioning coaches out there. How does a parent decipher between a guy that really knows what he's talking about, like yourself, and versus someone who just goes in there and they're just, putting them through drills with no emphasis on anything.
Sure.
How do they do it? Because now there are, I won't name places, but there are chains everywhere, a lot of places. Some of them, some of them are good, some of them aren't. Some of it has to do with the individual trainer that might work at that place too, right? Like it could literally be like, this guy's really good, even though the place is okay, right?
Sure.
Because he understands these things. How do you, like, if someone's trying to judge it? Because this is the thing that I think a lot of parents don't understand. And Derek, you correct me if I'm wrong, because Derek's, deals with high school kids all the time. They don't always know, like, okay, this is going to help me develop over the long term speed wise, and this guy's just beating me up. You know what I mean? Like, how do you help them decipher the difference?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're out there trying to help them decipher. I think we try to do it really well. Obviously, the internet access to information has made everybody a strength conditioning coach or everybody a speed coach. And that's a bad thing, right? It's like a good thing. But I think, I think the major differentiator is two things. I think it's the art of coaching and it's the coach's eye. And so, we all have information of, we're all going to lift weights. We're all going to do plyometrics. We're all going to do speed drills. We're all going to do fly 10s. We're going to do, most of us are doing the same thing. I think the differentiator is, do you have the coach's eye to see what an athlete's doing and be able to make real-time corrections to really move the needle, not just what you've seen and you're trying to figure out what you're trying to tell the athlete to do, but to truly understand, when you're talking about force production, pushing through the foot, getting transferred to the big toe through some rotational power, like those things are not easy to see. I mean, we have a lot of young coaches that even come into our, into our system, and, they might know 90% and be as good as most people out there, but they're missing that 10% of being able to see exactly what, you can do to move the needle. And then the other piece is just the art of coaching, which is relational. How good are you with kids? Do they know that you love them? Do they, are they happy to see you? Are they enjoying what they're doing? I mean, Tony Holler, I think, has the quote, or he has it in his 10 principles of kids that are, obsessed with something that, that they love what they're doing. They're going to achieve higher at it. And so, it's in our mission statement with my company of, relational coaching is a huge component and hopefully a differentiator between us and the guy, maybe at the park or next door that's just kind of trying to collect a paycheck and, run through a bunch of drills. There's low hanging fruit in this industry, right? If a kid lifts weights, if they do some running, the development curve can be pretty significant, doing even sometimes the wrong things, but when you're talking high performance, there's a coach's eye and an approach to how that needs to be done that I think we have a pretty good handle on. And that's not just from me. I mean, my team has decades of experience of developing speed and not necessarily doing it in a lab. I think that's the other component is, like, I had to take 12, 13, 14-year-old kids that, had never run track before, had never, done any kind of athletic movement. And now you're trying to develop them into maybe it's just a varsity level athlete. It doesn't have to be an NFL all pro, and those are the proving grounds right there. When you can take a kid from 15 seconds in the 100-meter dash down to 12.9, 12.9 still didn't make the final. It didn't even get out of the prelims, but it's a significant improvement where they're on the path to maximizing their own, potential. So I think it's, I really do believe that, the high end athlete is actually the easiest athlete to coach because they're, they're very adaptable. You give them something, they can figure it out in 1 or 2 repetitions. It's like, can you take a kid though for 6 months that, really struggles with just basic human movement patterns and develop them into a proficient mover? So that's kind of what we specialize in, right? I mean, we have a huge demographic of youth athletes that we're just trying to get them basic human locomotion, movement patterns. Are they, hitting the right positions that are going to help them move better?
Right. And I think that's all it's coach. Like you hit on that point too. And I think for a lot of people, like, they don't understand what it's like to really do that work with the younger athlete that's still growing, developing, hitting puberty, right? Like, their gene sizes are changing every 6 months. Their shoe sizes jumped from a 6 to a 9 in a matter of a year, and all of this, they're still trying, almost Bambi like, trying to figure out their bodies. Even at the high school level, guys will come in, as freshman or sophomore, and coach, I got to get to this weight, or I want to hit this weight. And it's like, buddy, you got to understand, like, your body's still developing. Don't focus on a number right now. Let's just work to be the best we can be right now while you're still growing. And Dave and I talk about it all the time. The hardest thing is to take a middle schooler, right, and ultimately determine whether or not the level of performance they're going to be as a sophomore or a junior or a senior, because you just don't know. Everybody's development at that level happens at a different time. And it's really interesting to see that, I guess, quote unquote, your lesser level trainers, that's their biggest demographic that they work with, where that's where you can see the most change, right? And that's probably why you have a skewed perception of, well, that's really good because he took this kid to this kid, and it's like, at the end of the day, like, maybe that's just puberty, or maybe that's just like a kid growing into their own. So it's definitely an interesting topic to see. But I definitely couldn't agree with you more, where the high level athlete's the one that's quote unquote the easiest to work with. They're going to do everything you say. They're going to do all this stuff off the field or off the track or off the weight room. So it's really difficult, kind of the situation where it's at now, at the lower levels.
Yeah, I think it takes a high level of patience, right? I mean, our mantra is keep it simple, make sure it's consistent, and through those two things, you'll reach a mastery level of movement. But it can take, not just weeks, it can take months, it can take years for just those simple movements over a consistent amount of time before you start really seeing that. And I get asked a lot of like, well, what do you do different with, a Christian versus, Johnny, the kid that just walks in the door? And the answer is we don't do a lot different. Even the professional athletes that had a profound impact on me. I got to watch Usain Bolt train probably 20 years ago. And, the first set of exercises they were doing were the most basic things that we do with our youth population. And it's like, well, why are we getting into such fancy, variations and trying to make it more than it is, when the best in the world, the fastest humans in the world are still mastering the basics,
There's no doubt about it. Many years ago, and this is a long, long time ago, but when I ran high school, there was a guy who was a legend. He was on, I think it was North Carolina A&T's 4x1 team back in the day, and he was in Olympic trials. His name is Terry Amos. I don't even know if he's still alive anymore, but he was from Bern County, where I was from, and he was a legendary track coach. And one of the things that he used to always have all these great sprinters, and he was from an area where they had a lot of good athletes that could run too. But he was always year after year after year, and one of the things he always used to say, in order to get fast, you got to sprint, and it was simple. It was like, because if you remember, like a lot of track coaches, and we talked about this with Tony, like they'll like go take a lap, you know what I mean? And Terry, back in this is the early 90s, I remember him saying this, and my father's been track coach forever, and he told me that it took him a long time to just hear what Terry was saying, even though he was winning. If I was winning championship after championship, it took him till he was in his 60s to really understand, hey man, they got to sprint fast, and rest. And that was a big thing. And that's when he started to really get himself to get more elite sprinters. And, but it's interesting because the information hasn't been passed along the way that you guys are passing it along. Yeah. And I think that's really what's different. Like stuff was passed between coaches. And if a coach got it, you'd be like, wow, how is he churning out all these great sprinters? Oh, they must be from an area that has a lot of great sprinters. And yes, that's probably partially true.
Sure.
But consistency obviously tells you that it's more than that, right? What is it about the information that you now know, and maybe talk a little about the central nervous system stuff, that you're able to really consistently teach speed development and have those drills that seem to have an impact on long-term speed development?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I have the really good fortune of having done it for 3 decades. And for probably a decade, I did it wrong, or I didn't do it well. and which can be the best teacher of anything, is to fail and do things that aren't, what we would call like mainstream, perfect periodization, perfect programming. And so you learn through those things. And then you start to realize, like, I think we have enough information to know now that some of the things we did in, 20, 30 years ago aren't what we should be doing now. Just because we did and it worked back then doesn't necessarily mean we have to now. And we've learned so much more about, energy system development and really not being afraid to step outside the box. Because really that's where most of the times I failed was, gosh, if I don't do X, then am I going to get the same result that I got 20 years ago? You got these athletes and they've kind of put their careers or their trust in you. You don't want to make a mistake, and go, oh, I'm really sorry. We probably should have run a little more volume with you, at the end of your career. So, you kind of have to be okay with trying some new things, and I did that in my career. In 2009, we won a couple of state championships, boys and girls, at the highest level in Colorado. And I was a pretty high volume guy back then. I had some influence from the Clyde Hart system and Baylor, and we produced, the top 400 meter guy in the country that year, and kind of thought that was the path, right? 400U, Baylor University. That makes a lot of sense. I didn't back then, though, really know and understand why we were getting there. The aha moment for me was within that time frame. I took that kid and did a lot of strength training, speed work, things that I was more comfortable with. And we saw a huge spike in his performance. So I already back in like 2009 was drawing parallels between speed is going to help, at any distance, whether it's 200, 400, even up into 800 meters, seeing some of that speed, pay off. So then you kind of go, okay, well, I'm going to try something a little different. And so fast forward 10 years later at Valor, we had the same result with a couple of boys and girls state championships. And those kids, I mean, they liked me a lot better than the kids in 2009. I can tell you that, because, they were a much lower volume, really fun training, speed development piece. And we far exceeded the performances from 2009, got similar results. I guess my point is that there's different ways to skin a cat, and you're going to, you can get to a place, doing it differently. But if you can do it more efficiently, if it's more fun, if you're not driving kids away from training or from a sport, then I think we're hitting the mark, and I think that's what people are starting to learn now, is you can get there a couple different ways. And everybody's got their different opinions of what moves the needle the most, what you should do. And I'm probably more of a guy that falls in the middle, that likes to take, call it the Tony Holler approach to, very low volume, micro dosing. And then also, you need some speed reserve and some capacity, especially in certain, sports or events, and then kind of blend them together. What makes the most sense for the population that I'm working with. And I don't think that there's a protocol or a system for every athlete out there. I think everybody's a little bit different, and you got to hope as a coach that you have enough experience and knowledge in each of those areas to be able to, inject a little more here, a little less there, and identify if an athlete, is lacking in strength because they don't accelerate well, or, they need more frequency work because their top end isn't great. And so you're going to dive more into neural training and central nervous system development. So, I mean, it's a lot, right? One podcast is never enough to go over all the things that go into training. It's really pretty simple for me. What is an athlete? What do they need to be able to do? So what stimulus do we need to give them so that they have adaptation that gives them an output in their sport that, that they need? If it's strength, if it's speed, if it's acceleration, if it's, power development, there's a lot of different components. And it's like, I've always said that training's like making chili. Every trainer out there makes chili. We all make it, but some people use beans, some people use meat, some people use this much garlic or that much salt, and how much you put in of each kind of makes it your own, your own version of your chili. But we're all still cooking chili at the end of the day. And so, there's guys out there that do it better than I do. And you just have to try to learn from that and try different things. And you'll find that some things work and some things don't, and not being so, I guess, stubborn to think that, no, we always do this, and so I'm doing it no matter what. That's, I think, where, maybe you get yourself in trouble.
I'll tell you, I think your point, it's really an individualization of development. And that's obviously more and more become an important thing. Like I think every athlete definitely needs different things. And then obviously there are certain core things that they could probably all do. And then there are certain things that are help this person versus that person more, depending on where they are, right? Where they are is a big part of that. One of the interesting when I think it was when I was 26 years old. I played football in college, but then I was in high school as a decathlete and a high hurdler, and I wanted to try the decathlon again. And so I trained for about like 6 months in a year. I got up to like 6,500 points in a year, but I was starting to my football injuries were starting to have an effect. But I radically improved. Okay, and I trained mostly on my own. And I was trying to figure out how am I going to run the 1500 well without sacrificing speed, right? Sacrificing speed at 100. The whole entire decathlon is basically a sprinter's event, including the shot put and all that stuff. Okay, it's all explosion and speed, and then you have the 1500, and I read, believe it or not, Bruce Jenner's book from it was like from the 1970s, and in his book, his coach talked about how they trained for the mile. And originally they talked about how they were putting in miles and it was costing them speed and they figured out this thing where they ran the 800 and they gave him I think it was like a 60-second break. Then he would run a 400 as fast as he could, 60-second break, and then a 300 60-second break, right? And they did that, tried to do that once a week or once every couple of weeks to try and give them some level because they didn't want to sacrifice speed.
That's right.
And it resulted in him running this phenomenal 1500.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I was shocked when I did it that I was able to even run the 1500 because there was no distance work involved. And growing up, you like even as a sprinter, we were running distance. Like we'd on our off days we go run distance, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized was, wow, it can be done this way. And now, listen, are you going to be a world-class miler that way? No, because there are other components to it. But you're able to run a functional mile. And what it taught me was like speed conditioning gave you a chance to be able to run a mile better without losing as much speed in the other events, which is where you really need it, right? So I always thought that was interesting. And every person I always told it to, they were like, how did you run a 1500 training only for the 1500 like that? I was like, that's what I did. Like, I literally read it in a book and it was like, I tried it because I was like, there's no way I have time to run 3-4 miles a day and doing all this stuff. And I think it's so interesting because it goes to what you guys talk about with speed development, like in going fast and without knowing it, there's probably some extent training the central nervous system.
Sure.
Talk about how the central nervous system is so important in the development of speed or whatever it is you're trying to train, right? Talk about how it is really important because a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, rewinding to what you said, and we have a lot of, I was a decathlete and, 9 speed and power events, you're not wrong that, anything you're doing away from that's going to take away from, 9/10 of the event. And some guys are just gifted and have a good aerobic, system and they can run a 1500. Some guys work really hard at it and maybe they suffer in some of the speed power events. I was a guy that was very much a speed power guy. I hated the 1500. I didn't enjoy training for it. And so, when you look at the central nervous system, right? Like it's the driver of our whole, body. And how you want that to go is, how do you train that? Well, you train it through really high outputs and, you're getting into the ATP energy system. And so by doing some of those things, you have to do things that stimulate that system. And so training the central nervous system isn't really any different than training any other system. It's like, if I want my nervous system to be able to move faster, then I have to move faster so that I get an adaptation from that stimulus. And, the highest stimulus of that is sprinting fast, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be sprinting. Sprinting is probably the number one thing that you can do that taxes that system better than anything else. But there's other fast twitch type movements of, fast feet and, hand drills and different things. Plyometrics are a very high central nervous system output, environment. And so, you have to have enough of those things involved in your training protocols, but then also those things fatigue very quickly, right? We know that there's about a, 5 to 6 second window of that energy system, followed by a very long bout of recovery for it to be fully replenished, or you're not really training in that high output environment. So, careful planning of, a guy like Tony Holler is, he's groundbreaking in some regards, because it's like, it makes a ton of sense, but people are afraid to incorporate a bunch of rest and recovery into their workouts. The old adage of like, keep moving. I talked to a strength coach yesterday, actually, and I said, when we're doing a mass specific force lift for a track and field athlete, we want 5 minutes of seated recovery in between sets. And he looked at me like, dude, our head strength conditioning coach would fall out of his chair if we had people sitting around for 5 minutes, in the weight room. And, breaking that mentality so that we get full output, and there's a million things you can go into of how you stimulate that. You don't go in and, you might implement cluster sets in the weight room so that you get full output during a lifting session versus operating under fatigue. Because when you really break down sports, really almost all sports, except for milers and 2 milers and, long distance athletes, you can come back to they're primarily played in that short anaerobic, energy system. So Vince Anderson had a big impact on me many, many years ago, looking at his acceleration protocols, and obviously a track and field guy. But I heard him at a clinic one time say that training should look like competition. And so that had a really big impact on me of like, football players, when the ball snapped, nobody's moving at, 65%, 70%. It is full go. And so, training should look very much the same as that. And then you prescribe the proper amount of rest. And that's how the central nervous system then starts to be able to operate at a really high level. You can't ask it to move slow in training and then expect it to move fast in a game. So I think, stimulating that, you can do it a lot of different ways. Sprinting obviously is the one that taxes it the most. And so that's something that we've leaned into. We take and we formulate all our drill work and stuff to create efficiency so that we can reach higher level speeds. And then that is getting that central nervous system stimulation for other movements that, you might see. We train a bunch of swimmers, for example, and we have them run fly 10s, and they don't look very great doing it, but what we're getting is maximum intent, maximum output. The nervous system is having to match that. So then when they get in the water to swim, they're getting a systematic, or a systemic effect of the central nervous system helping them swim faster. So, and it's really hard for coaches to draw that parallel, 1-to-1. We just know, probably again, because of the gift of 3 years or 3 decades of doing that we see athletes get better, when we do that with them.
So, coach, question. So that would be, and tell me if I'm wrong. So that would be obviously like, a coach who's trying to implementing drill work that correlates exactly with what they're going to do when they step on the field, right? Because obviously as a football guy you want to mimic those game-like situations as close as possible. And when guys could just, roll out a ball or go set up cones or any of those types of things, right? It all has to be aligned and kind of mimic and get as close to a game situation as you can possibly do it for that central nervous system, or for that nervous system to kind of understand and basically practice working at that high level of an intensity thing. Is that correct? And what I'm kind of going with?
No, that's exactly right. And I think, I've always kind of stood on the ground of I'm not a sport specific coach, right? Like I'm not taking, I usually don't take like a Christian McCaffrey through running back drills. Now, do we do things that look a lot like putting your foot in the ground on outside zone and accelerating, downfield? Absolutely. But, within our bounce fire series that we do and some of the different drilling that we do, acceleration, deceleration drills, they look very similar, you know,
Right.
but I don't necessarily have the time, the bandwidth, or even the knowledge of every sport out there to know exactly what they need to do technique wise, but I can certainly make sure an athlete can produce and absorb force better so that the sport coach can then develop the skill that they want to see on the field.
Right. Right. Allow that coach to do what he does best and know his individual sport. Look, dude, I'll give you this part of it. He'll be able to do this. Now you just kind of polish it off and you know, gear it towards exactly what you do, which is, you know, I love that, right? Because that's kind of what Tony did, right? Like he was a football coach, but maybe more of a track. So he kind of always is under the lines of like, look, man, like I'll give you the recipe, but you got to figure out the little ingredients specifically that work. And then obviously we all know it's athlete to athlete, it's kid to kid, right? It's not the old school mentality of like, you know, when I was coached as it, you know, cookie cutter method, right? Like we're all going to do the same things. We're all going to this, we're all going to, you know, lineman, you go do your thing, or, you know, obviously I always relate everything back to football, right? So, you know, bigs go do your thing, skill guys go do your thing. No, it's got to be each individual kid, just a lot like teaching, right? Like everybody learns a different way. And the best teachers are the ones that can kind of figure out and incorporate what each kid does great and gear it towards them in order for them to get the maximum, you know, effort or the maximum, you know, squeeze everything you can out of that individual. That's like what it is, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's hard in a large group environment, right? You're coaching a JV football team. It's really hard to individualize. And so you know, we've tried to create, you know, little systems and little approaches to, hey, everybody is going to do, you know, this exercise. And even through that, we know that we're not going to reach a level of mastery coaching 40 kids at a time, but can we do some things that are going to move the needle for them from a, you know, tendon development, tissue development, muscular development, central nervous system, twitchy type movements that are going to move the needle for them, even in a large group. Then when you get an opportunity to get a little more specific with a high level athlete or a one-on-one scenario, then you can start to look at deficiencies, asymmetries. You know, there's so much tech out there nowadays that, you know, you can find just about you want on an athlete. In fact, you can almost get lost in it. And that's been something that I've tried.
Right. You can go down that rabbit hole. That's for damn sure. That algorithm comes up, Dave, right? And you're just, those videos just keep coming and coming and coming.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that works really well for some athletes, and for others. I mean, again, I've been blessed to work with some of the best athletes in the world, and we run data so that we know, you know, where they're at, and athletes and parents, and in the private sector, you want to be able to show that you're worth your weight and what you're doing. But also, you know, you don't want to get lost in it, because you're going to see this. It's not a linear progression, you know, for any athlete ever. To your point, athletes change, they have injuries. You know, I've spent a couple of off seasons with high level athletes where it's almost plan B training the whole way through, because they come out of a 17 game season and they're completely banged up. And the last thing you're thinking about is development. You know, you're just thinking about back on the field.
Let us get back to zero, right? Let us get back to like where you're okay and capable of this. And I feel like, you know, the higher level of the athlete, that's, you know, what you're working with, you know, you almost build it up to break it back down and get to that, you know, and you're talking about longevity, right? And that's, you know, not to interrupt or get you off topic, but like, that's what drew me personally to Tony's stuff was, and everybody and all of his guys, because we've talked to a bunch of them, you know what I mean? From, you know, Mueller to all these guys. And it always comes back to health, right? Like I finished a 14 game season with all of my guys dressed on the sideline for that state championship game. And to me, you know, the best availability, the best ability is availability. You got to be out there to be able to do it. You know,
no question. And there's things.
And I think that's so key.
Yeah, there's just things outside of the training environment that you can't control. You know, it's like, you know, obviously Christian had a really tough year last year, and there's just things outside the control of, you know, when a guy, you know, carries the ball 25, 30 times a game and gets in, you know, 20 car accidents. There's things outside of the training that no matter what you do, there's going to be injury, there's going to be modifications and things like that. So, you know, that's a whole nother topic and a whole nother conversation.
Oh God.
I do have a question about like kind of about, it's not exactly that, but athletes who play like multiple sports, right? So one of the, I think the most like we all love athletes that play multiple sports. Those are a lot of
Damn
times
right.
the best athletes.
Yep.
But then the other question always comes in: where do you squeeze in development, right? Because you're trying to do that without overtax. They're competing all the time, right? Already,
Yeah.
so they may be taking care of a large portion of the competition part because they're going from season to season. How do they then squeeze the development side? And I think I kind of understand. Obviously, lifting, I can get that part, but because that's kind of a much more building up. But the speed and the explosion part, where you're trying to ride that balance, how do you like prescribe people working that part out?
Yeah. It's probably the biggest crux in our industry right now is, you're almost at a, the sport that you're trying to help the athlete develop in and have longevity and have success and high performance. You're almost fighting with them for time for the athlete, right? Because it's at the end of the day, there's money involved in youth sports. There's all the things. And so, they're always being asked to do more and more and more. And this skill development and this, session with this private coach who specializes in, triple option drill work or, whatever it is, fill in the blank,
Right.
Which is all probably really valuable stuff. But then a kid only has so many hours in a week, to do those things.
Right.
And what I've told some athletes even recently about is kind of a concept of outputs. An athlete only has so many outputs to give, especially at a high level. Some athletes have really high outputs. They can be 100-mile runners and they can go out and run 30 miles a day or whatever. They have a lot of those outputs, but those outputs are very, very low, low frequency. They're low output. And so to have a high performing athlete that can't do that, now you're fighting against that fatigue, injury. Every time they're on the floor, they're going to be exposed to different things or the court or field that could possibly take them out of their sport or out of training altogether. So it is a rub. It's you want them involved in those things, but I think that, especially the youth population, that age 10 to 14, if there was a movement of less competition, more development, and I'm not even just talking about my arena of, human performance. I'm talking just about like skill development, because the money, the fun, attraction is in the game, right? It's going to tournaments, it's playing 3 games a weekend, it's all those things, and those are all good things, and I'm certain that has to exist at some level for recruiting, for the skill acquisition in a game, right? If you're only a skill guy but you can't put it into a game, then you're no good. So I get that there has to be that, but there should be a little bit more of a balance, so that I think, our athletes developing at such a high rate in their sport that then they reach a ceiling too early because they miss some of the athletic development that they might need later on. And our deal is to, like, we want to do what's best for the athlete. For us, it'd be great for us to have an athlete train 5 days a week where we implement mobility and recovery, and, we can separate out their acceleration from their max velocity and change the direction and have this, awesome.
Oh yeah, that'd be a perfect storm. Yeah.
But we're never going to get that, right? We're lucky to get a kid 1 day, maybe 2 days a week. So we got to figure out what we can do, the best we can do in that day, to stimulate central nervous system, hit the things that they're not hitting elsewhere. And so, for us, weight room is always a part of what we do in strength development, but it's also something we know that everybody else is doing a lot of, right?
Yes.
We know a high school football kid is probably in the weight room 4 days a week with their coach. So if we're going to default to something, we're going to default to more efficiency and sprint mechanics and high speed outputs, not really necessarily worry about 3x10 squats.
Right. Cause that's getting taken care of by their coach at home. Right. And that's like an overall assumption too. You know what I mean? Like, and I tell my guys too, let's be on the same page. If you're going to go and do extra training or do all that it seems like a lot of these guys feel like they need at this point, like, well, let's have an open communication. Like, you've done this Monday through Thursday, you're going there on Saturday morning. Make sure you tell him, hey, I've done this week. And then you're hoping that guy ultimately looks at it and says, all right, I want what's best for this kid. I can now implement this. You're really hoping that he's not saying, your coach doesn't know shit. Like, he needs to be doing this. So we're going to do this. It's like, all right, well, but we understand that it's a business at the end of the day with that too. Do you tell the kid, hey man, Dave, we were just having this conversation this morning. At what point does that one-on-one trainer now transition from, okay, this is a business and I need him to book 30 more sessions? Or is it, all right, bud, like you can now move to this phase or do this? And I understand both sides of the coin, so it's really tough business.
It's tough in business because you want to have, you got to have, turnstile going. You want to have kids coming through the door, but sometimes the best training for a kid is to not train. They need a day off. They need a day to go, it affects them physically. It affects them mentally. They're just drowning in, stimulus coming at them from, especially a multi-sport kid. And I'm a big multi-sport guy. Don't get me wrong.
But and especially that age, 10 to 14, you got, now all of a sudden, you got all that other stuff going on in there, whether it be puberty, hormones, how about school, everybody? Like, we got to think about that too for a lot of the day. Dave and I have that conversation all the time. These guys are sitting in a chair from, 8 to 3 every single day. Like, what is that happening? So there's a lot to it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, could you imagine being a football, basketball, baseball kid nowadays at age 12? Like, good luck.
No.
Every one of those sports has a specialization coach and a club team but then yet they all do see value in sports performance. They want that, but some of them can't even figure out where to put it in because they've overscheduled with all the different things and the tournaments, the out-of-state trips, like all the things that are fun for kids. I mean, I had my kids in them. I did them, I'm not saying that they're bad at all, but it does create a tough deal. And when you don't have like a community or a collaborative approach with the club teams, with the coaches, it just makes it hard. And this is an industry where, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. That guy, it's terrible, right? I mean, Les Spellman and I spent a little time together this winter and talked about that, of just having a community of people that are helping each other ultimately to help the athlete. That's at the end of the day, what's the most important thing, and I wish that money and, revenue and all that stuff never had anything to do with it, because it'd be a heck of a lot easier, because all we really want to do is pour in and help kids. So
absolutely. You don't want to overwhelm them with 9,000 practices of this. And then I think it is, you're dead on. It's like, there is no communication between, especially at the high school, even in high school, right. Even now, they're in high school. Like, if you're a football player, the basketball coach, if you do both, like the basketball guy wants you,
Hey, you got to be doing summer league. Hey, which workout am I following? Am I following the basketball workout? This one's on the board? I'm supposed to do this. I got to practice. My club coach is telling me I got to be at practice.
You got to have an evolved thinker to really get them to all work together, which is hard to do.
Well, and typically what we see and what we've tried to do is we try to be very efficient with our training, right? I mean, if we get 30 minutes of movement speed work in and 30 minutes of power development in, even one time a week, we're gonna help that athlete quite a bit. But sport coaches sometimes aren't the most efficient, and so they think that more time equals success. And if they could just be a little more efficient with their practice, with their time, with their development, then they might have an extra day for what we're doing.
That is
now, Coach. Do you think,
Dave? Hold on a second. So that's a really important thing. So I think I might have mentioned this to Derek. I'm not sure if I did or didn't, but I was thinking, because my son's 9 years old, and like he's actually hurt now because he was doing too many things and he was growing really fast. Like, and literally that's what happened. A storm of things, those things happening at the same time. He's 5 feet. He's 9 years old, and he just grew and gained 25 pounds out of nowhere, and he's lean. So like, it's like, I was doing multiple sports, all this stuff. One of the things I may have mentioned to Derek, but I may have mentioned to somebody else. And I was thinking, like, when you go to a speeding conditioning coach, instead of, everybody always wants to make it an hour, right? Because it's more for the parent than it is for the athlete they're training, right? An hour, a parent pays X amount of dollars, they're worried about, like, my whole thing is like, probably shouldn't be more than 25 minutes for most of those kids, because the truth is, like, they're already playing multiple sports, and in 20 minutes they can get through something like the atomic warm up and some base strength training things. And it's funny because I made the mistake. This is me admitting it. I made the mistake of, while my kid was playing multiple sports, his team was going to go. I was going to have. I'm the one that set it up. Was going to train at a facility. Okay, his team was going, and of course he wanted to go because his kids were teammates were going. Very quickly, I realized it was way too much because he was playing multiple sports.
Yep.
But at that point, it was already too late. Literally, a few sessions in, it was too late because what happened was playing these sports. Now he went to a few training sessions. The trainer doesn't know that he's playing all these sports, and now he's starting to get beat up, playing games, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now he shot up from 4'9" to 5 feet. All this happened at the same time. And it was interesting because I heard the therapist say this to me. She said, one of the things I've seen is that when kids grow really fast, the last thing they really need to happen, not that you can control this, but the last thing they actually need is to play like in a championship when they're in this crazy growth spurt, because it's like a perfect storm. The CNS basically is hyperactive, right? And then the body's not, the muscles haven't grown at the same pace that the bones have, blah, blah, blah. So perfect storm of injury things. But one of the things that I was starting to observe and is like, you know what? Helping parents understand that you don't need an hour. Your kid might need 20 minutes today, 25 minutes today, and jump in. And it doesn't have to be like, a situation where they even stay the whole time. Because I think people are like, I need to stay the whole time. I was purposely bringing my son late to the training because I didn't want him to do an hour. I wanted him to do like 35 minutes. So I was bringing him 10, 15 minutes late, and he would bust his chops. I'm like, no, you're not going in. Because I already saw, and then by the time it really was a problem, it was too late. But what do you think about, like, this is, I guess, goes a little bit to microdosing, which I'm totally on board with Tony. That's kind of what started stimulating my thinking of it. But we're so cultured to like 1 hour for this and blah, 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 blah. And this goes back to the strength and conditioning days when we were like in college, and that's how the strength conditioning coaches approached it back then, right? Yeah. They basically structured your hour of training, and this is what you did. Talk about, maybe it's not only microdosing, but like how you can get a little bit over time, and that gets you where you need to be. Is that, am I on track on that or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you're talking about is time justification, right?
Okay.
Like we gotta justify our time of, hey, I'm a football coach. If we put 3 hours in on the field, we're going to be better than if we put 2 hours in on the field. And same in the weight room or in the training space of, we do go on the hour for our training things because it's how our business runs. What we do in that hour, we probably do about 15 minutes of work, in regards to how much rest time and things like that they're actually doing. Maybe it's a little more than that, but the point being is, how you structure that is, I talked about the efficiency piece a second ago. I don't think an hour or the time is as important as what you're getting done, the appropriate stimulus, the appropriate rest, that they're getting, so that you're not overworking the athlete, but you're also not underworking the athlete. I mean, kids are pretty resilient. They do go through growing pains. I've always said you can make some mistakes with middle school and high school aged kids. You can't make mistakes with college and professional athletes, right? And so you can miss a little bit with a little too much volume or a little less volume.
Okay.
The younger population. Now they're all going to go through Sever's disease or patella tendonitis, or, because of their growth spurts. Those things are just going to happen. And so, in your training program, do you have things like mobility work, right? I mean, those are a lot of things that are just missed of, man, we got to run fast and we got to lift heavy.
God,
and if that's what you're doing for an hour, then yeah, you're setting yourself up for an athlete to be injured or even just burn out, like psychologically.
Oh, there, so, up top. Yeah, absolutely.
Fun, and the movement is fun, and they're getting mobile and they feel good, and there's good interaction. And then they blast a couple of fly 10s and they do some fun, weighted sled pulls and, some of the things that are exciting for kids, but you're not doing, 12 sled pulls, you do 3 of them. You know, so there's ways to manipulate that hour to get them the stimulus they need without having to, you know, push through all these reps and sets and, you know, overload them to the point where they get, you know, fatigued and injured. So I really do think it's, you know, it is time justification for a lot of coaches. It's also how you structure that hour. I mean, you can, you know, what is it like? We talked about the decathlon. There's about 6.5 minutes of competition in a 2-day event. Right. So what are you doing in your hour? You know, is there some really good mobility, flexibility, recovery built into that hour? Great. Then they're fine for an hour, you know, but if it's an hour of like on the line, you're running every, you know, and you're just going, then that's a bad hour, you know, especially for a youth athlete.
Great point. That's
Coach. Do you think, Dave, just along this topic, do you think that's because most coaches coach the way they were coached?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think there's that mentality of just, you know, no sitting in the weight room, no standing around, don't bend over and show them that you're tired, right? That's one of the best examples, right? Like we know that physiologically bent over on your knees is the best way to recover.
Right.
But
and everybody's like, stand up.
I played, you know, high school football for a coach that played at Oklahoma in the 60s. And what do you think we did? I mean, like there was no bending over. There was no, you know, and we've just learned a lot of those things where, okay, if you structure it properly, then you're not wrong. It is probably just how we were, you know, it's that confirmational bias, right? Like this is how I did it. That's all I know. So and it worked for me. And, you know, we humans are very adaptable. So we overcome a lot of things. You know, there's great athletes that have overcome really bad coaches. you know?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's always, you know, who knows more, right? Like I know more. I'm a high school coach. You're just a middle school coach, you know, like, you know, I've been in college, you don't know, like all of that I think plays a role. And Dave and I talk about it all the time too, in terms of, you know, has a guy played at that high level, right, where he's literally been in it and understands what it's like to do those maximum effort things on a regular basis and turn it up on a regular basis? Or, you know, was he an average high school player, or did he even play high school, right? And now that's the guy that's kind of telling these guys what to do. Sometimes those guys are not, because they're willing to learn. They're willing to be sponges. They're going to go to clinics and learn about the other thing. How much, Coach, do you think it's that in terms of I was coached the way I was coached, or fear of doing something that the masses don't see acceptable? Like Tony gets a ton of blowback from your quote throwback coaches that are, no, man, you got to do this and you got to hit and you got to go full go all the time. What do you think the percentage is based on that, of like how it kind of balances out?
I think it's probably a pretty even mix of both. I mean, I do think probably the biggest factor is just the fear of doing something different, and not maybe knowing what's going to happen. And like I said, not many coaches are willing to put their career, their record on the line for saying, hey, I'm going to do it a lot different. I've been fortunate enough to be around, you know, I coached football at Valor for 12 years or so. And I saw who I think some of the best football coaches in the country run practices and operate at a completely different, you know, outside of the box of how I'd ever really seen it done. And yet, you know, 8 state championships later, and now Roger Schuman, who's my guy out at Orange Lutheran, they finished, I think 13th in the country this year. And his practices are completely different than how I would have thought they should be done from a guy who grew up in a football family, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, I think there's a fear there. There's a, you know, what's everybody else doing? If we don't get all the work done, are we going to be okay? You know, do we need to run that play 17 more times, or are we okay to move on and learn from it later? You know,
can we teach off the tape, right? Like, or do we stop practice and pause so we can coach? And now you're going into, you know, 3.5 hour practices, and, you know, dad's yelling from the stands like, well, that's because you don't practice and shit, you know? Like, I mean, look, we all know how that stuff works. But I really think, you know, like you said, it comes back to almost the justification, right? Everybody's trying to justify their way works. And it's hard because, like you said, there's a million ways to do something, and you can have success doing it every single way. you know.
Sure. And I don't like to be the guy that, poo-poos on, guys that still love to operate on 3-hour practices or higher volume, or, there's track coaches out there that still run the dog tar out of kids, and they have a lot of success. And so there are different ways to skin the cat. I've even been one of those coaches that has changed systems over the years. And so I don't like to judge what somebody else is doing because I'm not in their shoes every day. I don't know exactly what they're dealing with. I don't know how they interact with their athletes. All those things. For me, as a training system approach, I just try to be sound in what I think an athlete needs from and I try not to go down too many rabbit holes because there's a lot of different things out there nowadays that you can look into and see. And, I go, hey, this seems to make a lot of sense. That's going to move the needle for us. So let's implement that into our system. And if we do that, then we believe in it, pretty steadfastly that's going to help an athlete, because we're not just going to do something just to do something. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, 100%. That's a great point. Go ahead, Dave. I know exactly where you're going to go.
I was going to say, it's interesting because when you take the approach to 400-meter training, like Clyde Hart, who produced two Olympic champions, right? Michael Johnson and Jeremy Warner, right? And then you have the Eastern Bloc approach, to which no doubt work. Obviously, probably also was helped by steroids, but there's. Well, it's kind of, the sad part about the Eastern Bloc thing is it'd be much more widely looked at if it wasn't for the fact that it was like muddied with steroids, because I see all kinds of great old videos of some of the training things. And I'm like, I absolutely would like these things, like the gymnastics approach and development of a lot of things. And then same thing with like Charlie Francis, right? When Charlie Francis was teaching me, like he had some phenomenal things, right? Just accelerated the process by using, performance enhancing drugs. And that's always kind of a difficult thing at the highest level of sports, right? But there are multiple different approaches that got world champions, right? Carl Lewis and Tom Tellez, who, what they were doing, and the prototypical sprinter, which was Carl Lewis, which then also became Usain Bolt, right? And you see the number of tremendous track times that came out of those guys. But that wouldn't have worked for Tyson Gay, right? Who was 5'8". So that exact approach that worked for Usain Bolt and for Carl Lewis and very tall, big sprinters, Leroy Burrell, but not for Tyson Gay or maybe Noah Lyles, right? Who's not quite as not as big and as powerful naturally. I mean, you're not going to get any more prototypical than Usain Bolt, right? As far as like, if you could put every package of what you would want in a sprinter, you would say, oh my God, this is exactly it, right? 6'4", 200 pounds, and could start and could actually get out, right? Like, which most guys at 6'4", 200 pounds can't even do. So
cautioning any young trainers or coaches to be like, I'm going to do that because it worked for Michael Johnson. Well, right. How many of us have ever worked with a freak like Michael Johnson, right? Like, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things you could do with those special athletes that are going to appear to work, but not necessarily, a young developing middle school and high school age kid probably needs different things. And so, really finding the different attributes that you want to develop and then microdosing those in at a young age, because you're not training Jeremy Warner, you're not training Usain Bolt, you're not training Christian McCaffrey necessarily. And then, now do they do similar things? Yes. But program to program, is going to be drastically different with a young developing athlete.
Saquon and I think that's very radically different. Saquon and Christian must be radically different when you train them, right? Just their body types are so different, Christian and Saquon. So,
well, Dave, I also think the with the one of the you have good things and bad things. With social media, all parents see now are the highest of the high levels. And, like even my high school athletes compare their 40 times to NFL combine times. Like, guys, We're not in the same, right? I mean, but that's just naturally what they do. You know what I mean? Like, a fast 40 in high school is one thing, and then these guys get a time and their heads are like, they're ready to go bury themselves in the sand. It's like, dude, you're comparing this to the fastest guys on a football field in the world. So understand some of that stuff. I really try and hammer that home with our younger, incoming eighth graders, right? The freshmen, the sophomore that is still going on. They're still growing. Don't concentrate on numbers so much. Let's just work with what we're working with. I don't care that guy can bench 135 already. Like, I'm just happy you can rep that or even get the bar. Let's get our technique down. Don't be trying to come in here and clean it and doing all this. And that's a whole other thing about technique and all those things about how guys do things the wrong way or just are never formally taught that. I just think these guys now, with the access they have to information, that they want to jump ahead so fast.
Well, I think it's getting jobs. So where like coach is really like is in the position that he can have, I think, a really good customized approach. It's like, and you know this, Derek, and coach, you probably knows too. If you interview for a head football job, for example, everybody wants to know what's your offensive system. Well, if you went in there and said, well, I see what kind of athletes I have, and then I'm going to develop the system based off of that. And I've interviewed where I've said, listen, this is some of the things I like to do. Like, I'm no huddle. I like
right. That interviewer might look like, oh, this guy doesn't have a plan.
Hey, listen, I got to see, like, do I have a running back? Can my quarterback throw? Can he not throw? Those are things that, and then I can kind of construct the system off of that. But you'll never get a job, right? Because if you say that, but I think what your approach is really right. Like, you might have a kid that comes in, walks in, built as a young kid, a 14-year-old, similar to this type of athlete, and you say, okay, let's try some of these things. This may work for you. And then, you get a guy that's built more like Saquon, low to the ground, big legs, strong, powerful, like can jump backwards over a human being. I don't know how anyone can even do that. But has that frame. You say, okay, maybe we could try and see if we can do certain things with this type of athlete. Are there core tenements that you subscribe to? Like, I think I need to do this with kids every time, and this gets me X.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, again, you mentioned all those high level athletes. Well, almost every kid we work with, from youth up to the professional athlete, we're going to put them into some of our Bounce Fire series that we teach, which is a, kind of a systematic approach to how you push through the foot and apply, force to the ground, eliminating braking forces, maximizing output, those kind of things. And so I do that with every athlete I ever work with. I mean, if it's a first-time high school girl, we're doing it that first day. If it's last spring with Saquon out in LA, we're doing that first day. And I mean, I even got the comment from Saquon of like, holy smokes, I've been running wrong my whole life. So again, I mean, I think it's
you're like, yeah, dude, and you're still breaking those records. So shit. Like, all right, let's really sharpen this. Let's polish this statue.
So, there are just some of those common thread things in there that a lot of athletes, a lot of coaches aren't coaching or teaching. So that's kind of where we start. That's our thing, is we work from the ground up. We teach the athlete how to interact with the ground with their feet. Because if there's three main components to, running, it's ground interaction, it's triple flexion and triple extension. So how can we help each of those things? And we focus heavily on the ground interaction because we feel like it's overlooked a lot. And that's been very clear to me, even working with the high-end athlete, because when I get them, I worked with Troy Franklin last week for the Denver Broncos. Same thing. He really struggled at first to kind of figure that out. And then once he got it, again, very adaptable, he figured it out. But no one had ever really, talked about that with them. And, we're not going to take Troy Franklin from, who's already a 4.4 flat guy to, 4.25 in a couple of weeks. But can we make him more efficient so that those movement patterns can be more sustainable throughout a game, throughout a season? And the answer, we think, is yes. Some of those drills also create, ankle stiffness and, help some of the health of an athlete, which again, we talked about is very important. So yeah, there are threads that we, go through with all athletes, no matter what. And then, based on age, demographic, sport, then we might do some different things. But our core basic principle is force output, and whether that's linear or lateral, type movements, that's where we develop those systems, to help athletes, no matter what sport. When they walk through the door, we can help everybody.
With that's phenomenal. So, like I've seen also, you're probably familiar with Matt Collins, right? So he walks around with no shoes and everything, and like his belief in like ground up development goes with bare feet, right? And there's a few people that now are like talking, and then there's some people that think that, well, some people's feet aren't formed properly for interacting with the ground, so if they do that, it just builds on some of the negative things that they have in their body structure, and they should have shoes and orthotics or whatever, when they do certain things. What do you have any kind of thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I think it's almost like everything else that I look at. Is there some good things around training barefoot? Answer is yes. Should you train barefoot all the time? I think it really depends. I just think that, that there are certain things, there's injury risk when you train barefoot, right? So when I'm working with, Christian or Janine Becky or some of these high levels, should we do some foot development because there's all the muscles and bone and everything in the foot that needs development? Yes. Have we put ourselves behind by being in supportive shoes all the time? Probably. And so to me, it's not a baby bathwater, all or nothing. It's more of, let's expose the foot to some ground. Let's do some of that in our potentiation, in our warm up, where we have some barefoot movement. But then let's also put shoes on when we really want to apply force to the ground. When we're going at high speeds, we want to prevent injury and get max output in like a sprint effort. I don't really ever have athletes sprint fast barefoot. I just have a personal thing where, if I stubbed my toe as a decathlete back in the day, in a pursuit to the Olympic trials, well, that might end my season. And so those things have to be considered. But I do think there's something about balance and mobility and stability in the foot that I think is really important. We also play sports in shoes. And so there's something to be said about, the training has to look like the sport. Well, at times you got to put athletes in cleats. You should have them in shoe wear. You should have them in those things because that's how they're going to play the sport. So I think the answer is yes to both. I think you got to have a little bit of exposure barefoot wise, and there's some really positive, good things about it. I'm not somebody who thinks you should be training like full all the time barefoot.
Great point. Before I let you go, we talked about at the beginning, you moved from Colorado to Nashville. What is it about Nashville? What made you move? And then we'll let you go. We'll let you jump off. But it was great. And by the way, it's been great having you on.
Country music, man. No, I don't know. I got a really neat opportunity to come down and help kind of build, direct, and be a part of a program they're going to build down here in the College Grove area. And there's not a lot of details right now. There'll be some stuff coming out about it here soon. Okay. But I kind of got, picked a little bit and vetted to come down and help them build this big, beautiful facility complex. My business back in Denver is pretty healthy. I got a team of people around me that can, run that facility and stuff. So my wife and I took that opportunity. My daughter lives here in Nashville. She's 25 and married. They'll probably start a family soon. So maybe not too long from now, be a grandpa down here. So just kind of an opportunity that came up that we thought, let's take a swing at it and maybe get a chance to go help some more kids.
Very, very cool.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Excited.
Great spot.
Nashville better be excited what they got coming down the door. Like, here we go, maybe another new spot, now you can rock and go. Yeah, absolutely. Hell yeah. And country music ready to rock.
Well, Coach, it's been great having you on. I can't thank you enough. I mean, really, really learned a ton listening to you, your experience. We can't thank you enough for coming on.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you, Coach. Thank you. Go get him.
That was phenomenal. Really, really great. Like, I mean, just understanding the thought process on everything. I mean, for especially a guy like him, such a high level, like the thought process.
Well, the foundational pieces, right, that are necessary, right, to work with those highest of the high level, but understand that like we're all doing the same shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It has to start with this groundwork, this, you know what I mean? And then to get that feedback and even understand that a guy like Saquon, records all over the place, this, that literally says to a guy like that, like, man, I have been doing shit wrong the entire time, you know, to be like, to understand that. I think that's so cool. To kind of go through that and whatnot. I think it's really awesome. He has an extremely, you know, like down to earth, yet like has the science backing to understand like, hey, this is what it is. And then understand at the end of the day, like I always think the great ones understand that it's still, I can, you know, it's not this way and this is what does it. It's all right, well, here's what's worked with what I've worked with or what I've seen, you know, based off of those types of things. It's a generalization, it's not a specialization.
No doubt. When are we on next?
Oh,
Tuesday?
next week. Yeah, Tuesday.
Great. This was great podcast.
I was excited to get him. That's why I was like, hey, we'll alter whatever we can, man.
I encourage you
know?
just to Google Coach. Google them, and then you'll be able to go from there.
Go look at his shit.
Until next time.
Thanks, guys.